The text we're reading today is called Not Just Another Pipeline. Some things I noticed if we're going to preview the text before we start, I noticed that there's this picture. That's the first thing that jumps out at me. Looks like I don't know, maybe a teenager, a young person. I see some signs in the background, maybe like some sort of, I don't know, protest of some sort. When I think of another pipeline, I think of, protesting, and then I see this state trooper or official standing over this person. Um, that's really kind of all of the headers or pictures I see. It's not a very long text. It's talking about the expansion of Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline. And then I see betrayal of Minnesota's indigenous communities. I also notice that it's an opinion piece, which is just something to keep in mind as you're reading. And then let's just go back over an exclamation, or a star is like something I find interesting. A question mark is something that I look at and think, not necessarily that I don't understand, but just something to kind of think of. Green is important, and then yellow is something I don't know or something I want to go back to. All right, let's get started. So, the title, Not Just Another Pipeline. The expansion of Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline is a breathtaking portrayal of Minnesota's indigenous communities and the environment, by Louise Erdrich. I think that's how you say it. Miss Erdrich, a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, is a novelist and poet based in Minnesota. Her most recent book is The Night Watchman. Okay, something that I did not notice before is this. The picture has a caption next to it. It says, a young Line 3 protester in Palisade, Minnesota, near a construction site this month. Okay, and this was happened in December, end of December. Okay, Palisade, Minnesota. My daughter and I are walking along the fast-flowing stream that is the Young Mississippi River. We are 2 hours north of Minneapolis in Palisade, Minnesota, where people are gathering to oppose the Line 3 pipeline. So the first thing that I'm going to highlight, and this isn't actually a highlighter, but underline up the word oppose, that gives me an idea of what this author, her perspective on it, or what the perspective of the people she's writing about. Patches of snow crunch on pads of leaves as we near the sacred lodge along the river's banks. It is here that Enbridge is due to horizontally drill a new pipeline crossing beneath the river. And then I am going to underline pipeline. I know that we kind of reviewed it in the preview. I'm not 100% sure what a pipeline is. So what I'm going to do after I finish reading is I'm going to go Google and research more about what a pipeline is and how it works. We enter the lodge. The peace, the sweetness, the clarity of the water is hard to bear. The brush and trees hardly muffle the roar of earth-moving equipment across the road. The pipeline is almost at the river. So it looks like it's being built, and it's almost there. Oops. Last month, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's administration signed off on final water permits for Enbridge to complete an expansion of its Line 3 pipeline. After the final section is built in Minnesota, the pipeline will pump oil sands and other forms of crude oil from Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin, cutting through indigenous treaty lands along the way. Construction has already started. So I'm going to also underline crude oil just because I need to know more about, I know what oil is, but like what defines crude oil. And then indigenous treaty lands is something that's super important. And I'm going to put an exclamation point right here because to me that's super important that it's cutting through treaty lands. If you don't know what a treaty is, that is something that I would highlight in yellow so you can go back and look into that more. This has been a brutal year for Indigenous people who have suffered nearly double the COVID-19 mortality rates of white Americans. That's something that's super eye-opening and crazy to think of. We have lost many of our elders, our language keepers. COVID has also struck so many of our young. Nevertheless, tribal people worked hard on the elections. The native vote became a force that helped carry several key areas of the country and our state. On the heels of those victories, the granting of final permits to construct Enbridge's Line 3, which will cross Anishinaabe treaty lands, was a breathtaking betrayal. This word betrayal is like something that to me, it's a really strong word. The land of 10,000 lakes is already suffering from climate change. So climate change, I think, is super important to know that when we're talking about this, that's an important part. This is not just another pipeline. It is tar sands climate bomb. It is a tar sands climate bomb. If completed, it will facilitate the production of crude oils for decades to come. Tar sands are among the most carbon-intense fuels on the planet. The state's environmental impact assessment found that the carbon output would be equivalent to 50 coal-fired power plants or 38 million vehicles on our roads. Wow, that's a lot of output. According to Jim Doyle, a physicist at Macalester College, who helped write a report from the Climate Action Organization MN 350 about the pipeline. He observed that the pipeline's greenhouse gas emission are greater than the yearly output of the entire state. Wow. That's a lot. If the pipeline is built, Minnesotans could turn off everything in the state, stop traveling, and still not come close to meeting the state's emission reduction goals. The impact assessment also states that the potential social cost of this pipeline is $287 billion over 30 years. It's a lot of money. Carbon footprint aside, the extraction process for oil sands is deeply destructive. Mining the sands often requires scraping off the life-giving boreal. It's a word I'm not 100% sure about, so I'm going to underline it. Forest growing over Alberta's oil fields. Photographs of Alberta's oil sand sites show a vast moonscape impossible to reclaim. The water used in processing is left in toxic holding ponds that cumulatively could fill 500,000 Olympic swimming pools, as one National Geographic article puts it. If the pipelines were to leak, the sludgy mixture is almost impossible to clean up. The state's environmental impact statement notes that the pipeline will run through 2 watersheds that drain into Lake Superior. Any spill in the vicinity of the Great Lakes, which contain 84% of North America's available freshwater, is an existential threat to our water supply. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a question mark. The question mark I have is, if it's such a threat to our water supply, what happens? It says it's a threat, but what happens and what does that mean when we have a threat to our water supply, and what happens to people like us that aren't maybe living right next to it? The Climate Action Group 350 Kishwaukee compiled data from Enbridge sites and found at least 1,000 spills by Enbridge pipelines between 1996 and 2014, including a disastrous spill into the Kalamazoo River, which flows into Lake Michigan. The Environmental Protection Agency estimated in 2013 that in spite of an extensive effort, just over 160,000 gallons of oil would remain in the river. It's a lot of oil. There is nowhere worse on earth to have oil sands pipeline systems than the Great Lakes region, says Rachel Havrelak, the founder of the University of Illinois Freshwater Labs. It is, everything else aside, the world's worst planning. Today, instead of reducing their production levels, many oil sands companies, with the support of Canadian banks, have doubled down on production, creating a surplus. These Canadian-based corporations are perpetuating a vast ecological crime, and Minnesota is their accomplice. But we could cross over to something better. Tar sands do not have to flow through this pipeline. The rivers can heal, the great scars gouged into the wetlands regenerate. Many tribal traditions recognize women as keepers of water. It is a spiritual as well as practical responsibility, and therefore especially meaningful that Deb Holland, a member of the Laguna Pueblo, has been chosen as our next Interior Secretary. Peggy Flanagan, Minnesota's lieutenant governor and a White Earth tribal member, has taken a firm stand against Line 3. Organizations led by Anishinaabe women have taken every available legal path to protect our waters, but are now engaged in an on-the-ground battle for the future, which brings us back to the lodge by the river. We are here on Earth. Oma Akin? I don't know what that is. I'm guessing it's a different language, but that's super interesting. And the waters are alive with energy. The Mississippi widens and becomes mighty as it flows south. Holding my daughter's graceful hand in my own, listening to her sing an ancient song in to the four directions, I can feel her strength and her fragility. In the protest camp, people are talking around the fires about First Nations resistance and Standing Rock. They held off a pipeline. So can we. Every morning at 10, people gather to pray. Every day, there are more people in the circle.